The bottom line is we're not broke. There's plenty of money. It's just the government doesn't have it.
Well, you know, it turns out the Democratic Congressman Keith Ellison wasn't just some rogue tax and spender, but he was just more honest about it. Because come to California, my friends, where politicians are cooking up taxes that would make the congressman proud. And after all of this, because of a hike in the state sales tax, it apparently did not bring in enough sales taxes. In fact, it brought in less in sales taxes. So now talk of taxing basic services like a trip to the dentist, or even presently exempted food if you buy over a certain amount. Clever, but Guy Benson says costly, very costly. With Guy, Jessie Jane Duff, and Dave Callahan. All right, Guy, you say not a smart move because it's a zero-sum game. Explain.
Yeah, it's also not a surprise, Neil. This happens all the time when states and countries try to raise taxes on various services or products or income. There are these big projections that they throw out there, these rosy projections saying this is the panacea, this will fix our problems. It's just one thing. It's just this last time, and then we're done. And then, surprise, surprise, the projections don't actually bear themselves out, and the revenue goals are not met. And they sit around looking at each other wondering, well, gee, what happened? And they start scrounging for more tax increases. And it's a spiral that goes downward, which is why California has seen so many people leaving and businesses leaving, because it's just open season on businesses and successful people in that state.
Jesse, they can turn around and say, well, at least we're not looking at raising the state income tax. We're just finding other ways to get money. What do you think?
Well, I find it ridiculous that a family in Los Angeles already has to pay a 9% tax living in L.A. alone, the city tax. So add that onto their rent and to their food and to their health care. How is it that a family in California...
Well, the food is exempt, but what they're talking about is over a certain amount it might not be. But nevertheless, you don't like the trend.
No, absolutely not. California has a $407 billion debt. That's over $10,000 per citizen of California. The family has to make a budget, and yet they want to give more money to a state that can't manage its budget or its spending or its debt. They don't have the money. That's why this sales tax isn't working. If Californians had the money, I'm a Californian, actually. We like to spend our money, but if we don't have it, they're not going to be buying things, so they're going to try to jab them even harder.
You know, Dave, half of this I wouldn't even mind. I do mind it, but for the sake of argument and my respect for you, I'm not going to get into that. What I do find odd is that they're far more creative coming up with ways to tax you than to just cut back on the spending.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
Well, let's just give some proper context here. What we're talking about is 2 years ago, a bipartisan group of kind of California wise men, including many business leaders, came together and said, hey, we got to deal with the state's fiscal situation because we keep having these big sort of ups and downs. And what they proposed is to restructure and broaden the sales tax, which right now just hits goods. And we now have an economy where so much money is spent on services. Remember, Neil,
you're right. You're right about that. But now they're saying now goods and services. Not saying services in replace of goods.
Only half of California's $2 trillion economy involves sales of goods. And so that sales tax, which was created back in the 40s, is missing a lot of stuff.
Then I'll even grant you that.
And what they also want to do, Neil, is cut back the personal income tax, restructure.
That part they haven't done yet. Guy, here's what worries me. In Europe, I can remember, I'm old enough to remember when they first pursued this value-added tax thing. And it was only going to be small. It was only going to be about 1% or so, if memory serves me right. And then that it would eventually lead to removing, countries' various income taxes. Now we know that in many countries it's north of 20%, closing in on 30%. Those income tax rates haven't gone away. In fact, they've rocketed. So that's the pattern with this sort of thing. The goods, taxes on goods will stay, and the taxes on the underlying services will stay, so the double whammy will stay.
Right, that's exactly the game that they play, and it's goalpost shifting. They say, oh, it's a trade-off. We'll raise this tax today, but don't worry, tomorrow we'll reform and lower this other tax. And then, hey, actually the revenues from the other tax didn't work out so well, so we're not going to touch the second part of the deal that we made. And California's problem is not that half of their goods and services aren't being taxed enough. California's problem is they aren't competitive. People don't want to move there or to open businesses there because it's not a place where you're rewarded for that sort of business, which grows the economy. And I mean, that's also why it's a state that is completely dominated by Democrats, supermajorities, Democrat governor. They have the second worst credit rating in the country. Number 1, by the way, or number 50, I guess you should say, is Illinois, also raising taxes left and right.
I understand, to Dave's point, would you agree that if you're going to update the tax code and look at how it didn't reflect and doesn't reflect the times, that maybe that is a good way to go about it? My only fear and distinction I drew with Dave is that they don't draw the same type of distinction and care with cutting spending. Jess?
Well,
Jess, go ahead.
Well, they're not cutting anything out in California. The problem that they have is a $407 billion debt. And when I hear politicians talking about trying to squeeze their citizens for more money when they're not spending, that tells me they're not paying attention to the needs of their citizens. Why wouldn't this sales tax work? They just raised it. Proposition 30 was passed by the people, and yet it's not working. It goes to show that the people are not spending because they don't have the revenue. The state is being very unfair to its citizens. People are leaving the state. Texas, Governor Perry has appealed to the state and brought many businesses out of California. They're fleeing the state, and it's become an entitlement state, and that's why they are going on the verge of absolute bankruptcy.
Well, I was just in California, and for some reason, I still saw people there, still saw a lot of people there. So they love the state. It's a beautiful state. I take nothing away from the state. But doesn't it, when you're a businessman, Dave, and you hear what's going on, the various fees and the shifting around things, if you had your choice and you didn't know where to move to, let's say you're looking at California, you're looking at Texas, you're saying, well, all I know is that California is a mishmash of the various taxes, excise fees, so many things that my accountants and we're going to be up 24 hours just trying to figure it out. No way we're going out there.
Hey, the strongest part of the U.S. economy in recent years has been the tech economy, and that economy has been based in large part in California. I mean, startups are happening there all the time. And this
a lot more startups are happening in Texas.
And Neil, this idea that California is not cutting spending, I mean, California has had draconian spending cuts under Governor Brown, and it's raised taxes, and they now have a balanced budget. I think this is a good example of what the federal government needs to do. You need a balanced approach.
Wait a minute, you're using California as an example?
Exactly,
that would be like
Neil.
Me using as an example for Valley's Fitness Club.
Look,
you want to go there?
Once upon a time, before we had extreme Republicans, the way you balanced budgets was you raise taxes and you cut spending. That's what Governor Brown did.
Once upon a time, before we had extreme liberals, we had an openness to cutting taxes.
Hey, Neil, I'm just saying that, look at the example of California that has a balanced budget, and look at the example of Washington, the federal government, which does not.
It's a junk state. It's a junk debt state.
California has more millionaires than every state that Mitt Romney won put together. I mean, this is a $2 trillion economy.
We could argue it forever.
And it's coming back.
Okay. We're going to get you guys back a little while. I don't know. In the meantime, think quick. What is the difference between George Carlin